In 1988, a small New Jersey town is shaken by horror. A devoted mother murdered, satanic symbols scattered throughout her home, and her teenage son vanished without a trace. Was this a demonic ritual or a calculated act of evil? Horror master Eli Roth unravels the terrifying truth in Let the Devil In. Now streaming new episodes Sundays exclusively on MGM+.
Previously on The Girl in the Pond.
Either Hazel came down here alive or dead. We don't know.
Oh,
I think she was alive.
Being dragged down this hill.
In July of 1908, the body of 20-year-old Hazel Drew was found floating in Teal's Pond in Sand Lake, New York. Investigators quickly determined that she was murdered. The girl in the pond became front-page news across the country.
What the motive of the murder was, and who committed the deed, are mysteries that seem likely to baffle the ingenuity of the officials. For never was there a case in which it is so apparently impossible to get a clue as in this one.
I'm Jessica Marshall.
And I'm Patrick Tyne, and we're determined to find out who Hazel Drew was.
And what happened to her. This is The Girl in the Pond.
Episode 3, Come to Troy.
This episode contains subject matter that may be disturbing to some listeners, so please listen on with care.
Troy case deepens in mystery. Hazel Drew's assassin is unknown. Officials are completely baffled, as no clues of any value can be found. Girl's whereabouts from night of July 3rd cannot be traced.
Two days after the body was discovered, July 11th, 1908, investigators confirmed that the girl in the pond was Hazel Drew. It was a huge step forward in an otherwise baffling case. According to the Times-Union's reporting at the time, Hazel's father, John Drew, ID'd the body. He showed up at the funeral home in Sand Lake. He recognized her by a brooch pinned to her clothing at the waist. It had an inscription on it, 3 letters, H-I-D, Hazel Irene Drew. John Drew and his wife Julia met with investigators later that day. They said Hazel had been living and working in the city of Troy, New York. She'd been a domestic servant to wealthy families there for the last 5 years. She'd left her small rural hometown 10 miles from the city when she was 14. They didn't seem to know much more about their daughter's life other than one small detail that later would become a huge part of the investigation. She was a prolific letter writer.
So little do the parents know about their daughter, her habits, and her associates that they have been of little assistance to the district attorney in being able to throw any light on the mystery. They say their daughter was a good girl and came home frequently, but they can recall nothing that would indicate whom she was in the habit of going about with. The family attends the Third Methodist Church, and Hazel went to that church and Sunday school while she was at home. Neighbors say that she was a quiet girl and not given to discussing her affairs with anyone.
Investigators thought it was a little strange that Hazel's parents didn't really know much about their daughter, considering how often they said she came home. And it's not clear how John and Julia Drew reacted to the news of their daughter's death. Some reports claim they were hysterical and bereft. Others claim they showed little reaction. It's not necessarily fair to draw any conclusions about how a parent reacts to the death of their child. We certainly try not to do that in news stories we cover today. But in the age of yellow journalism, John and Julia Drew's demeanors would be very closely scrutinized and theorized about by the press in the coming days. The article the Times-Union wrote on July 13, 1908, said that John and Julia Drew lived in a, quote, humble dwelling on the south side of Troy. It described Hazel's family as highly spoken of in that community. They had 5 children. Hazel was the second oldest. The Drews had recently moved to the working-class city neighborhood from Postenkill, a more rural part of the county that we visited in episode 1. Out in the country, John had been working on a farm. In the city, he identified himself as a laborer. Other than that, there wasn't much detail on their personal lives in the papers yet. Hazel, they told officials, lived and worked in an opulent home on the tonier side of Troy, specifically the home of highly respected Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute professor E.R. Carey.
Before we go further into what developed with the investigation that fateful July, we have to do a little scene setting. What was going on in this part of the world in 1908? It's pretty crucial context for this story.
The bigger picture. America in 1908 was firmly entrenched in what historians called the Progressive Era. It was a time of economic prosperity and social reform. There was momentum for progressive politics and cleaning up government corruption. That movement was personified by Theodore Roosevelt. He'd been president since McKinley's assassination in 1901. It was a time of pushing for safer working conditions. Think The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. That was written in 1906. And it was a time to call out civil rights inequalities and push for societal change. Think women's suffrage and The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois.
Technologically speaking, American transportation was making huge leaps and bounds. The Wright brothers had taken their first flight in 1903. New York City launched its first subway train in 1904. Electric streetcar and railroad train tech was advancing. The automobile industry was exploding. Cars were becoming more common and accessible. The speed at which people could travel and communicate, whether it was within their own community or between cities, was getting faster and easier by the second.
I've got an old mule and her name is Sal, 15 years on the Erie Canal.
Economically speaking, New York State was a powerhouse in American manufacturing, especially upstate, from Buffalo in the west to Troy in the east. Factories and cities along the Erie Canal churned out products, from textiles to iron, that fueled American economic prosperity.
The way I know, from Albany to Buffalo, Low Bridge.
It's interesting because Troy really starts growing the same time New York City does.
Few people know more about Troy history than Rensselaer County historian Kathy Sheehan.
You had we were the Eastern Terminus for the canal. I know the song goes Albany to Buffalo, but you look right across, we're at Troy, it's the Eastern Canal. You have all these products coming in from Western Vermont, Western Massachusetts. So we start out as this kind of commercial center, really kind of a shipping spot in the 1820s. Geographically, we're great. We have the resources. So for all these factories to start, we have the running water, the falling water for the textile mills, for the iron mills down in South Troy. So it just grew.
You can always tell your neighbor, you can always tell your pal, if he's ever navigated on the Erie Canal.
You can usually find Kathy Sheehan in her office downtown, in the Hart Cluett Museum. A historic brownstone. It's preserved remarkably well. When you walk in, you could easily be fooled into thinking that you'd time-traveled back to the Gilded Age. You think we're exaggerating? Just watch the HBO hit show The Gilded Age, or the 1993 Scorsese movie The Age of Innocence. Both of those have scenes that were filmed in downtown Troy. The gas lamp-lit brownstones and cobblestone streets are a dead ringer for late 1800s, early 1900s New York City.
If you were a wealthy person in Troy, is that the kind of house you would live in, or is that like the 1% of the 1%?
1% of the 1%,
Okay.
For sure. At that time, that was George and Amanda Cluett's house, and of course George was the founder of Cluett, Peabody and Company, and they were one of the largest shirt and collar manufacturers in the world. And, you know, he employed almost 10,000 women in the city of Troy alone in the factories.
Around the 1820s, a Troy housewife supposedly came up with the idea for a detachable shirt collar. Instead of switching shirts after a long day of work, a guy could just switch collars and be ready to hit the town at night, or something like that. It caught on in a big way. Factories that made them started popping up everywhere, and Troy became the Collar City. Another thing that Troy is famous for, when you drive through the city today, you're going to see a lot of road signs, business names, and historic plaques that sport a very familiar American icon. Uncle Sam, that bearded, star-spangled, hat-wearing, finger-pointing patriot that became America's mascot. And don't you know, he was from Troy. The origin of Uncle Sam is said to be based on real-life businessman Samuel Wilson. He was a Troy meat packer in the early 19th century. He had major contracts to supply rations to U.S. soldiers during the War of 1812. As the story goes, he prominently stamped all of the rations that he shipped with the initials U.S. Someone joked that U.S. stood for Uncle Sam. One thing led to another. There you have it, in red, white, and blue. For your country and my country, I'll do it all over again.
Anyway, in 1908, Troy was booming in almost every way an American city could at the time.
The people are here at the right time. Stephen Van Rensselaer and Amos Eaton starting RPI, and Emma Willard starting the Troy Female Seminary. The confluence of all those things just makes Troy really grow. And there was this attitude of, you want to get something done, come to Troy. You know, it's gonna work.
But for all that, it wasn't exactly a utopia. In 1908, the city had been long run by an impenetrable and arguably corrupt Republican political machine. All the city's leaders were loyalists, including the county district attorney who handled Hazel's case. His name was Jarvis O'Brien. We'll talk a lot about him as we delve into the investigation.
The political machine is fascinating at that time because it really was a push and pull. And what is interesting is that you have to look at kind of like the immigration movement that happens in Troy. The Democratic Party that starts to kind of take hold, and this is mostly Irish. They're now second generation Irish. And so they have taken jobs in the police department. They are taking jobs in the fire department, and they're moving up the social ladder. For many years, it was a Republican stronghold, and now you have this wave of Democrats moving in. So yeah, there's this a huge pull, and these waves of immigration now. Now, by the turn of the century, you have now a huge wave of Italian immigration who tended also to be Democrat for the most part. So there was it's a nativist threat by the kind of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who had been running the city and running the county for so long.
Political disputes in that era were settled with speeches, in newspapers, and at the ballot box. But they were also hashed out with fists and deadly weapons. Hazel's death came on the heels of the Bat Shea case. That was a famous 1894 Election Day killing in the city's 17th Ward. A brawl at a saloon, which also served as a polling place, ended in murder when Bartholomew Bat Shea and an associate shot and killed a Republican poll watcher. The Democrats had come, allegedly, to stuff the ballot box in a tight race. Tensions were high. A melee broke out. Members from both parties were injured, but by the time it was over, Robert Ross, who came from a prominent and wealthy family of Troy Republicans, had been shot to death. Bat Shea was executed 2 years later. It also wasn't unheard of for unfortunate things to happen to folks who ran afoul of the machine. Kathy Sheehan is very familiar with the story of Hazel Drew. She studied it extensively, formed her own theories about what happened. She doesn't rule out political motives. Hazel Drew was a domestic worker living in a wealthy and politically connected household. RPI professor E.R. Carey was also an engineering consultant for the city. She could easily have heard things or known people.
Who was she connected to?
Right.
And what did she know? And was that why she was knocked off?
Right.
Would they have it in them to orchestrate a murder? I mean, like this almost Nixonian level of where these that some of these detectives were like, the plumbers or something, that they were really there to do the bidding outside the law for a power elite in this city. Like it wasn't just the run of the ballot box stuffing there, or the little bit like the penny ante political crimes, but actually orchestrating the murder of a young woman.
Yeah, would this could have been planned that well? Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to think no, but I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a top-down kind of a thing. I would wonder that she had an affair with somebody who, may have pillow talk, given her some other information, then realized, this could really screw me up.
Yeah.
And, kind of offed her.
Like Bob Moore and Mark Marshall, Kathy Sheehan says she wants to see Hazel's murder solved. But if it never comes to that, she believes it's still a mystery worth studying.
One of the things that I think was always fascinating about Hazel Drew in this time, and why this story fascinated people, was because you had so many of these young women leaving the farm. You remember her family's from Posting Hill. They're farmers. And you have these young women leaving the farm, coming into the city, either working in the factories, and then having to find places to live that are safe, which was kinds of accounts for things like the Young Women's Association. She's not the only story in town where young women disappeared or young women were murdered, and or they met up with people like Mame Faye, who now bring them to the dark side, and they're going to be prostitutes.
We could do a whole other podcast series on Mame Faye. She doesn't really play a concrete role in Hazel's story that we know of, but she is a peripheral character worth mentioning. Mame Faye's real name was Mary Fahey Bonter. She was the daughter of Irish immigrants, and she grew up to run a very profitable and well-known brothel in Troy's red light district in the early to mid-1900s. They called her the Madam with the Heart of Gold. Supposedly, she got the nickname because she treated the women that she employed remarkably well. At one point, Hazel Drew lived and worked in a neighborhood not that far from Mame Faye's brothel. Could they have crossed paths at some point? That's not impossible.
There's no doubt Troy plays a major role in Hazel Drew's life, and quite possibly a role in how she died. But Troy is not where she was last seen alive. We're going to get into that next, but first, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
The decisions made at the state capitol in New York impact all of us, from our property taxes to the cost of health care or our civil rights. It's all really complicated, but I'm here to help you sort through it. I'm Dan Clark, author of the Capitol Confidential newsletter from the Times-Union. Find that at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O. capitalconfidential.com. See you there.
"12-year-old Jaliek Rainwalker vanished without a trace from a small upstate New York village on a cool November night in 2007. His adoptive parents say he ran away. Police believe he was murdered, but a body has never been found, and a suspect has never been named.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah,
Appreciate
okay,
that.
all right, but you don't want to talk. Then when I learned they were trying to undo the adoption, that's when I learned that this story was very complicated, well, a lot more complicated than I even thought.
Almost 2 decades later, the case remains unsolved. I'm Jessica Marshall.
And I'm Wendy Libertor.
In this podcast from the Times-Union, we take a deep dive into the mystery of this missing child and try to find some answers.
So have you come to terms that Jalik is probably dead?
Yes. Okay. I feel that he was killed on November 1st, 2007.
Available now, wherever you listen to podcasts.
So, can you just tell us generally what was Sand Lake like in 1908?
Oh, that's a good question. Sand Lake was a hopping place.
Sand Lake town historian Bob Moore has a stack of photos of his town from this era. He spread them out on his desk when we visited him in his office. They're all sepia-tone snapshots of what looks like a pastoral summer paradise, straight out of a period drama. Women in big, bustling skirts and large feathered hats walked arm in arm with men in coattails and cravats. Horse-drawn carriages lined the unpaved roads. Today, Sand Lake is a quiet, rural community. A total 180 from what it was in Hazel Drew's time. Back then, it was a hot summer vacation destination. People from as far away as New York City would flock there each year to enjoy that part of the county's many lakes and camps. It was so popular that even Teddy Roosevelt was known to hang out and hunt there on occasion. For Troy residents, it was kind of like a New Yorker going to Coney Island for the day. A fun day trip. It was only about 10 miles away. It took a little less than an hour to get there by trolley car.
There was a trolley that ran from Troy out here to Averill Park. There was an amusement park, Crystal Lake Amusement Park, so people would come out here to picnic and party and have fun. Now, in addition to that, there was, up in the woods, there were hunting camps, hunting and fishing camps. So I think all of that makes it kind of an interesting place to explore.
Is that why Hazel was in Sand Lake when she died? Was she day tripping? Maybe. But also, maybe not. The question of why Hazel Drew was in Sand Lake is one of the biggest mysteries in her case. And it turns out Hazel Drew had an uncle, William Taylor, her mother's brother. He lived on a farm in Sand Lake, up on Taborton Mountain, not far from Teal's Pond. And she stayed with him for about 3 weeks the previous February. She had been there, recovering from an illness.
There's one more bit of historical context that we need to provide here before we can really dive into the investigation. Here's a little more from the Times-Union on July 13th, 1908.
In the minds of the officials, it begins to look as if the affair might in some degree be likened to that of Billy Brown, who met her fate in a lake in the Adirondacks at the hands of Chester Gillette.
Just 2 years earlier, America was fascinated by the murder of another 20-year-old woman. Her name was Grace Brown. Billy, she was called. She was blonde, like Hazel, and also considered a beauty. Also born and raised on a farm upstate. Billy moved to the central New York city of Cortland when she was 18. She went to work at a skirt factory there. Cortland is about 2.5 hours west of Troy. While there, Billy met and fell in love with Chester Gillette, the dashing socialite nephew of the factory owner. They had an affair. She became pregnant in 1906. Chester tried to ghost her when she told him. Having a child out of wedlock back then, of course, could completely sink a reputation. Billy threatened to expose their relationship. Chester, suddenly responding, suggested that they go on a vacation in the Adirondacks to smooth things over. He took Billy out on a rowboat on Big Moose Lake on July 11th, 1906. And then, according to investigators, he hit her in the face and knocked her into the water, where she drowned. Chester insisted that she threw herself overboard to try and kill herself. He was convicted of Billy's murder in a 3-week trial that got intense media coverage. Chester Gillette was then executed in the spring of 1908, and the story became the inspiration for the 1925 novel An American Tragedy and movies like A Place in the Sun. There were many superficial similarities between the murder of Billy Brown and that of Hazel Drew. The media brought it up constantly in the early days of Hazel's murder investigation. The idea that Hazel could have been pregnant and killed by some social climbing lover like Chester Gillette to cover it all up, well, it didn't seem that far-fetched for the time.
Several theories have been advanced as to the cause of someone throwing the girl's body into the pond, for there is no question that she was dead before she struck the water. An autopsy revealed the fact that, not like Billy Brown, the girl had nothing to fear from discovery.
I just kind of wanted to reflect for a minute on, the idea that people automatically jump to assume that Hazel was in trouble, right? That she was pregnant. And if you look at the papers at the time, how they reference that, they don't actually say the word pregnant. They don't actually say words like rape. They don't say anything that would actually describe what they're trying to say. However, they'll say things like, she has nothing to fear from discovery, stuff like that. Well, the case of Billy Brown obviously was a primer, but the fact that you would have automatically assumed back then that, the reason why this girl died is because she was in some kind of trouble that had to do with, loose morals or, behaving badly. Like, that was just automatically what people would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the thing is, when Hazel was up on Taborton with her uncle sick, and we still don't know what that was. But also think about it. It was 1908. I mean, there were, penicillin had not been invented. You could have been sick with anything.
You could have had a cold, for crying out loud.
You could have had any sort of malaria. I mean, anything. I mean, I don't know, maybe not malaria up here, but there are any number of things, especially in that period, that now you could go to a drugstore and, get better in a day or two, where you would really need to convalesce.
Right.
Tuberculosis. I mean, anything. I don't know. But immediately to go there because she's a young woman. I mean, it's obvious that the papers would go in that direction and speculate, wildly. With this all happening in the shadow of Billy Brown.
Right.
For sure.
It turns out that it doesn't really matter because the doctors who performed the autopsy on Hazel's body in July said she was not pregnant. They wouldn't come out and say the word pregnant, but they determined, with the definitiveness of a doctor, you have to kind of take their word for it that Hazel was not pregnant. However, there are many other ways that a young lady could get into trouble in this era.
From people who have observed the girl and who have noticed her, because she was pretty, it is gleaned that she had a fondness for good clothes. She is also known to have had a fondness for good times. She dressed in a fashion that would cause some suspicion.
Suspicion of what exactly? The reporter doesn't elaborate.
She certainly had a desire for the finer things. She had some nice clothing that she had that was definitely above her pay grade. She's not making that kind of money to have somebody make clothing like that. So someone was giving her other money for her to look really good.
Can you kind of just define the women's fashion of that era?
Well, it was actually, we were kind of in the middle of it's still in the Edwardian, you've moved out of the Gilded Age-y, bustled thing, and skirts are looking a little sleeker. You're not having quite the big bustles on the back. Corsets are kind of starting to come out of fashion a little bit. Yeah, they were still wearing them, but they weren't we're not cinching you into a 17-inch waist.
It's hard just thinking about that.
It's hard to just think about it, yeah. There was definitely what I think is interesting, especially for the women who are working is this almost has this kind of masculine look. It's kind of a white collar, high collar blouse, shirt waist kind of a thing, and then traditional black skirt, or dark skirt for every day.
Kathy Sheehan believes Hazel's sartorial choices actually reveal a lot about what may have happened to her.
When she went out on the trolley, she had it was a coat, like a duster. And so if you were in a car, it literally kept the dust off your nice clothes. It was July. They're linen, they're very simple. It's really just to protect your other clothes. And then you usually wore some sort of a hairnet that also was kind of protecting your hair from flying all over the place with your hat. And her hairnet was intact. Which I always thought was an interesting thing, because usually once women got to where they were going, the coat came off and the hairnet came off, and you might have just put your hat on. So I thought that was interesting that she had her hairnet on, which makes me think that she got clunked in the whatever car, motorized, whatever vehicle she was in.
Oh, that's an interesting detail.
Yeah. Don't you guys find that interesting? I mean, it's just because that's what women did, and so she wouldn't have kept that on.
Right.
You wouldn't have kept that on.
Conscientious as she was, people made her out to be, like, that would have been the first thing maybe that she would have done.
Yeah. That would have come off the hair. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. A woman's role in American society at the time was in flux. It was the early 20th century, and on one hand, women, primarily those women in the middle and lower classes, they were encouraged to work outside their homes. They'd earn wages working factory jobs or as maids or governesses to the wealthy. The women's suffrage movement was gaining major momentum, too. Strong female characters, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, they were household names. But at the same time, though, women, especially young women, were expected to be models of propriety. A girl had to be of, quote, good character, chaste, church-going, demure. Their reputations were everything. And those reputations could be sullied a little bit too easily. Even getting caught stealing a quick glance at a man could cause irreparable harm to a girl's reputation. It's not that surprising, then, that the media and law enforcement at the time were making all kinds of assumptions about Hazel Drew's reputation, and that she may or may not have been a good girl. Kathy Sheehan says the anti-suffrage movement in Troy, that is, the people that didn't want women to earn the right to vote, used Hazel's death as proof that giving women more rights was a bad idea.
Now, the anti-suffragettes are holding her up again as another example of, see, they shouldn't be in the city. They shouldn't be working. They should be with their families. They should be waiting until their fathers picked their husbands out for them. And none of this would happen if she hadn't left the darn farm. If she just stayed the hell out in Post and Kill. And this is fair warning to all of you young ladies that are, here in the city. Beware. They did throw that fear factor in a lot. And then, see, women can't handle this, so they shouldn't have the right to vote. Oh, yeah.
Spoiler alert, American women got the right to vote 12 years later. About a year and a half after Hazel's murder, November of 1909, the Times-Union ran a piece by one of its female advice columnists. It was called Some Advice to the Girls. It's a great snapshot of the conflicting pressures society of that era placed on young women like Hazel Drew.
The murders in this vicinity of Anna Mitchell, Hazel Drew, and Caroline Gorgon make us bold enough to indict the following lines of advice to our girl readers. First, know this. The average man in his attitude towards girls and women is a sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personage. He has two sides, a good and a bad side. For instance, The average young man will spend hours in coaxing a girl to kiss him and then think less of her when she consents. Strange, but true. But there's another side to the man. If you prove to him that you are modest and pure and capable of taking care of yourself, he will respect you down deep in his heart. Do not be a prude, and do not be afraid of any man. Be honest, frank, and fearless, but draw the line. Let every man know he crosses that line at his peril. He will not cross it, but he will respect you. Remember, my girl, most men have two sides.
Needless to say, to our 20-25 ears, this sounds pretty cringy. It's giving major victim blaming. Men in the early 20th century seem to have gotten much more of a pass than maybe they'd get in our current informed and evolved society. Boys back then were gonna be boys. They didn't bear any responsibility for their behavior, but you, my girl, have to suffer enormous consequences if you don't successfully navigate the impossible gauntlet that they throw. Now, knowing that, you can start to see how complicated the truth of Hazel Drew's life may have been. She was at the center of a boiling and chaotic stew of ever-shifting Troy politics, gender politics, class divisions, and cultural norms. The odds were stacked against her in so many ways. She seemed to be damned if she did, damned if she didn't. And we all know by now how it turned out for her.
It is the theory of the officials that the girl either met a man prior to going to the pond and accompanied him there, or went there to keep an appointment. As the body had been so long in the water, and the rains had washed away telltale marks, the officials are obliged to group about in the dark for what transpired there. But it is believed that the girl was either hit on the back of the head with a blunt instrument and rendered unconscious and died in a short time, or she wrestled with her companion and was thrown forcibly on a rock. The companion, seeing that life was extinct, in an endeavor to cover up the crime, took the body to the pond and threw it in.
Next time on The Girl in the Pond.
I would have thrown her in jail to get her to talk.
She looked very pretty, all dressed up in a white silk waist.
He mesmerized her, or what you call hypnotized my Hazel, and she did whatever he asked of her.
We'll go back into Hazel's past to search for clues that may unlock the mystery of her fate.
The Girl in the Pond is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced by Jessica Marshall and Patrick Tyne, written and edited by Jessica Marshall, editorial direction and fact-checking by Erica Smith and Casey Seiler. Production help from Daniel Roberts, Sarah Diodato, Mike Goodwin, Tony Pallone, and Susan Mahalik. Our theme song is The Last Rose of Summer, written by Thomas Moore, musical arrangement by Matthew A. Streifert, vocals by Josephine Diodato. Additional music supplied by Lionel Cohen and Francois Couture via Getty Images, and the Library of Congress National Jukebox.